Hello, all you cosmic travelers and wanderers. This is Darlene Grift and K. Melissa Waterman, inviting you to join us today in our episode of Expansion from Within, Exploring Multidimensionality.
Welcome back, everybody. Here we are in our third season. It's episode number 42, and we're going to continue our discussion on freedom. You ready to roll?
We are rolling.
Great. So I think we were left off. We were talking about integrity and keeping our feet under us, how to manage not going into shame and that sort of thing around freedom, to keep us in this sense of freedom and to be able to identify it. Do you have anything else you want to say about that?
No, for those listening, like, it's not easy. I think that's a big thing that I walked away with that, for people that have not been either working on themselves or they're just coming into awareness, of how to navigate life, because that's part of our experience in this lifetime, in this time period right now, is how do we stay stable? How do we navigate life? How do we stay free within ourselves? And it isn't easy. And it takes, for some people, all they have to be able to have that sense of freedom.
Yeah, so let's talk about emotional freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, our emotions can really be burdensome. I think we are often fighting with our feelings. We're wishing we weren't having any particular feeling we might be having. Can you say how you define emotional freedom, or what you think it's about?
Well, I think it's about the freedom to express your feelings. We touched on that the last time about, if you have shame, it's better to find someone that you feel safe enough with to share that won't belittle you or not hear you, that type thing. But that emotional freedom is, again, not just expressing it on the outside. It's that emotional freedom of feeling like you're at peace within yourself around your emotions.
Right.
So for me, I've found in my life that I don't get angry, right? Like, I've learned as a kid, you don't get angry. My father was always angry, so that was not something that I wanted to be. And my mother had her fair share of being angry when she was pushed over the rails, right? So I grew up not feeling comfortable with my own anger. But in the moments that it happened to me, in the moments that I felt that pressure of something on the outside that was creating this for me, and I ramped it up, in my world, I got like really angry, but in other people, they would say, well, that wasn't really angry, you were frustrated, but in my world, it felt like I really expressed my anger, and there was one situation that I remember, like, it felt like I was like spitting because I was so angry, not at the person, but what was being portrayed in my life at that time, right? But it felt so good.
Right.
It was like, wow. I think if it was at somebody that I was really hurtful to, I probably would have felt different. But the movement of that energy in expressing anger feels good. And it wasn't condemning anybody or whatever. It was just the fact that, oh my, this thing happened to me. And I am so, I'm so enraged that it happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt good. So
Right.
I think that place of having a handle on our emotions, it depends on where they're going. That
Well, and
freedom to express.
what you just described is you had the emotional freedom to have your anger,
Yes.
and it felt right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what comes to me right at this moment is that emotional freedom could possibly be an inside job, or at least in part an inside job, meaning I have to be okay with having the feeling, having the emotion, whatever it is, whether it's fear, whether it's joy, like a lot of people don't express their full joy
Hmm.
because they don't give themselves permission. They don't have emotional freedom around joy. They keep a little lid on it. And then when challenged, they don't know how anymore. They don't know how. They're not quite sure how to play. They're not quite sure what fun is, right? Because they haven't had any. They've been maybe someone in their life started tamping it down for them, but in adulthood, they're tamping it down. And so you have to first give yourself permission to have emotional freedom, to say, wait, all of these emotions that are actually standard issue, except for shame. Shame, I don't believe is standard issue, but they come as a guidance system and they're in here for a reason and they're not bad. They're not, these emotions actually have a purpose. And
Hmm.
if we're not mad at ourselves for having the emotion, then we can express and we can actually feel good. Whether even if it's sadness, like sometimes people will talk to me about when someone dies, they're grieving, but the whole world gives them permission to grieve when someone dies. Like it's such a societally accepted thing to have a couple of days off from work and to just cry for days.
Hmm.
We don't have that kind of freedom 2 months after the person's dead.
Correct.
You're supposed to have your shit together by then. Excuse my language. You're supposed to have it together by then. So how can we encourage each other and ourselves for more emotional freedom?
Well, we were designed, like you said, it's part of who we are as humans. That was one of the things in the experimentation, right? Is humans are designed to have full freedom of emotions that will course through their body in any given moment during the day. And we have the freedom of choice of how to handle those emotions and anything that comes to us. So that's what we were given. That's a big plate to be given. That is a full plate of how to do that. So it is about starting with even looking at the range of emotions. There is most likely, like you said, joy, or for me, anger. And for me, it's anger and joy sometimes. Staying neutral feels like it's more safe for me, but any of those other things feel like they've been guarded or judged according to how I grew up. So it's like taking that full range of emotions, anger, sadness, grief, like putting joy, any of the love, putting any of those in a fan, right? And saying, how do I relate to each one of these? Do I allow myself to be angry? Do I allow myself to be joyful? Do I allow myself to love others and or myself? Like where are we with that spectrum of emotions that we were given so that we can take a look at that and we have something to work with. Oh, I don't allow what could I really be angry about that I haven't expressed? Because we'll deny it, we'll hide it, just like we'll hide or deny any of those emotions, right? So it's identifying where our lack is or where our over amount is.
Mhm.
For some people, it's like they're just, everything is joyous and whatever because they can't handle anything other than that. It's too sad for them. So where are we on that spectrum? And then where did those beliefs or where did those emotional lack of or governing issues come from? What happened in your early childhood? Do your parents not have joy? Or are they always depressed? Or are they, like that's a big piece of depression too, right? Is where is that blocked emotional capacity that your body has to go into depression to protect you or
Right,
believes that it protects you?
right. This feels like clearing timelines, right? When we're working on our emotional neutrality or balance, and neutrality, I think neutrality is more in how we behave, what kind of choices we make about our feelings. Because
Hmm.
if you're angry, you can choose. You're not saying, I'm not going to be angry if you say, I'm not going to scream at this person, right? I'm not going to kill them. I'm not going to throw things, but I'm still angry. And so finding that healthy way to be angry is where our neutrality comes in. It's not that we want all of our emotions neutralized, it's that we want our response to our emotions to come from a balanced, neutral place. I think that's a huge clarification, very important.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not about confining or restricting ourselves on freedom by saying, oh, I have to stay neutral,
Right, right,
and sometimes getting those feelings out because you can't talk about them is putting them on paper, getting them out in an art form, a creative way or something. But I think the bottom line is being able to articulate. We've been giving a voice, you know,
right,
whether we sing it out. So maybe it's not even, maybe we find a song on the radio that just feels like it breaks our heart because we have so much grief. But maybe if we sing that, whether it's in the shower or out loud or nobody hears it, it's that place of moving those emotional energy that holds us captive and keeps us from feeling free,
right, right.
which will affect our physical body at some point.
Oh, absolutely. Our emotions are very tied to our physical organs.
Right.
Absolute, beyond a shadow of a doubt. So let's talk about freedom of action. Like, what do we mean by that? Freedom of action. Do we have freedom of action?
We have so much restrictions around freedom of action, but we if we lose our integrity within our freedom of action, we're going to be more restricted, right? So if you don't have a balance of your own integrity, your own desire, your own will, your own allowance and acceptance, but also commitment to who you are and who you are becoming, and your freedom to speak your truth, but you don't hurt someone else. Like if we have all that, then the freedom of action feels like it's more allowing, it's more open, it's more available, right? But if you're not centered within yourself, then you could pick up anything. You can pick up a stone, a rock, you could pick up a gun, you could pick up whatever it is, because that expression of action, if you're not in harmony with neutrality in some way, or understanding yourself or governing your emotional body, that it can come out and it can wound one or more people.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
there's a limited freedom of action when you
Mhm.
are not in harmony with your own integrity.
I was talking to someone who was helping to develop a kids camp, and they were in their 20s and they were wanting freedom. They were wanting the kids to have freedom. And if the children wanted to be naked, they should be able to be naked. And if the children wanted to have sex, they should be able to have sex. And that was what freedom meant to this particular person I was speaking with. And I remember thinking that camp was going to not do well. That the parents were not probably going to, if they wrote it down in their little manual and said, this is what we're going to allow, that there weren't going to be too many parents that were going to send their 7-year-olds to a camp with 10 and 12 and 15-year-olds where who knows what all was going to be going on. And so their heart was right. They wanted to teach our children to be free and to have freedom of action. But our actions have consequences.
Mhm.
And it almost felt like a blanket that had no thought in it. It had no substance. It just was an idea. And every rule that came against this person, every idea, and rule isn't even the right word. It's more like any suggestion that showed up, like, well, what about the liability of having
Yes.
children that could possibly be having sex with each other? What if it's a 17-year-old and a 12-year-old? Like, what's the liability? How do you manage that? Oh, well, that's not freedom. Liability is not freedom. Well, okay, but we live here in the third dimension. Like we have to kind of pay attention to some of the rules, right?
Mhm.
So it's freedom of action to me feels like it. I'm not sure that there is all that much freedom of action.
Not with how we're living these days. It would have to be a utopia, right? It would have to be in some way that everybody was perfect, whatever that is. Um,
We already cleared these timelines. We already
yeah,
cleared them.
yeah.
We're all walking around in integrity and making very informed choices for our own selves, and our egos were in balance. And yeah, that does feel like utopia.
Yeah. And we're looking, you know, we look ahead in our choices that we make. We don't just say in this moment, I want that. And then you carry that out and then there's a consequence afterwards
Right,
that you didn't even think about, you know? So
right,
it's that freedom to have it at that extent where it doesn't interfere with anybody is really like your own world. Like you
right,
can have the freedom of action in your own world as long as there's nobody else there.
right,
But that's
right.
not
Like
real.
being naked in your own house. No
Yeah, and
problem.
that's not real. Right.
Right. And, well, it's real in your own house if
Yes.
you're by yourself or if you're with a partner and you're both agreeing, or if you go off to camp that's, into nakedness and you're all
Yeah.
agreeing and that's great. If you're all adults, you're all, what do we call it? Consenting adults, then the rules shift a bit. Um, but again, the word rules comes up. Like there are third dimensional, the third dimension or has some kind of rules, right? Gravity
It's
is
a
a rule.
structure. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a structure, you know, and when cosmic order comes in, there's going to be a structure,
right,
right? We're just heading towards that. I don't even know if
right,
we'll see that in our lifetime, right?
right,
Um, but we're heading towards whatever that cosmic structure is, that cosmic order that they call it, which I think was really what was given to us very early on as humans before we created where we are now.
right. Yeah. Well, it's nice to think that there was some order that was presented early on that we've might be able to reattain. I like that idea.
Not
Yeah.
without clearing ourselves up in some
Right.
way, because we're going to be held accountable for that. We are who we are because of who we've been. Like there's no other way to look at that, you know? And I know that that's my belief system, and I know that that's what the evolves are adamant about. And others have their other belief systems, which are not necessarily wrong. It's who they are.
Right.
But I think for me, that makes sense.
Right.
How can
Well,
you advance unless you know what you've done or where you've been or the gifts that you have? They're also
well, I
part
think
of that.
that shows the importance of history, right? Like, so we don't keep redoing the negative part of our history.
Right.
Um, what is really heavy on my mind is that whether it's freedom of speech or freedom of action or freedom of emotional freedom, like what we're talking about is that the seven seeds are super important, that boundaries are important,
Hmm.
that intention is important,
Hmm.
and that our egos be in order, that our egos be in service of the divine rather than in service of the self.
And I think that's the hardest part is to bring our ego to that place.
Yeah.
Because what was it that you mentioned the other day that we all have bias?
Yeah. Well, I think bias and freedom have so much in common, right? Like it we all have biases, right? Like I prefer lemon sauce over tomato sauce. That's my bias. I'm more into French food than I am into Italian because of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the bias I have. I'm going to continue to choose French food over Italian food. Nothing against the cultures, nothing against it's tomato sauce I have a problem with. So, but if I don't know it, if I don't know that I don't really like tomato sauce, then I get judgy.
Hmm.
I get judgy about tomato sauce. I get like, ew, that's bad. Why do you like that? Like I can see how when the bias becomes implicit and we don't really know we have it, we lose our ability to choose integrity
Right.
because we don't even know we have the bias. And so I think, you know, yeah, I think it's a big can of worms, this whole idea of implicit bias.
Yeah,
I
because
love
it's
it.
our blind spot.
It's a serious blind spot. You
Hmm.
know, being a white woman, I know I have an implicit bias, but I can't tell you what it is because it's implicit. Like as soon as I know it, it's not implicit anymore.
Right.
Right? It's an interesting concept all the way around, but it definitely I think the implicit biases inhibit other people's freedoms and I think they inhibit mine, right? That becoming aware, being willing, being wanting to know what our biases are and our implicit biases makes things a lot easier if we're, again, if we're opening ourselves up to self-reflection. Like, well, what is it? What do I believe? Oh, do I cross the street by accident when a person that I've deemed dangerous is down the road? What made me think they were dangerous? Is it their skin? Is it their clothing? Is it their size? Is it
Mhm.
their sex? Like, there's a million things I could be biased about. I
Right.
could have had a terrible problem with large women, and it just could be a larger woman coming at me. Like, it doesn't have to be the expected things a woman might be nervous about. But if I don't self-reflect, I'm just going to keep making choices and decisions and behaving, I think, in ways that impede people's freedoms.
And I think that as that implicit part of the bias comes up, I think if we pay attention to what we say to ourselves inside, when they're,
Right.
it's like, oh yeah, look at him this and look at them that. And, when you do that internally, because we always have self-talk, but if you notice, if you're
Right.
aware of that internal dialogue, I think you can find those biases pretty quickly because they are there somewhere floating around in our minds, even if we don't speak them.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I think that's the self-reflective piece, right? Like being aware of what we're thinking and having some control over our own minds, saying, oh no, I'm not continuing to think that way, rather than just letting our brain go wild, doing whatever it does. Our brain often thinks it's the master of us. Don't forget to do the laundry. Don't forget to do this thing next. And it's like, I got it. Chill out. Like, stop going so fast, brain,
Right.
right? But that's a skill we have to learn, to take control of our own mind. That's part of integrity. That's part of having a good core self, that ego in alignment. I think all of it is really important as we practice the seven seeds and we stretch for neutrality.
Yeah. And the other thing that the universe provides us with is they will give us situations, events, and people in our life to bring up those issues,
They
right?
sure will.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yes.
The
So
truth.
it's us noticing and being aware that, oh, here comes this person again, or this type of person again in my life. So what is it about me that I need to take a look at? That's another piece of freedom. How do you
That's right.
break free of what you keep attracting to you that you don't want?
That's right. That's right. And we're talking about ego states. We can let's end today's session and talk about that some more next time.
Great.
So, you ready for the announcements?
Yes.
So the Cosmic Travelers session is a live event that happens on the third Sunday of each month. Everybody participates in a guided interactive meditation directly with the evolves. Please contact soulunion.com to sign up to attend that. You can ask questions at soulunion.com. You can contact me, Melissa Waterman, at livingwellbeing.net. Both Darlene and I both have YouTube channels where you can find these episodes. And last but not least, we have a Facebook page called The Cosmic Travelers, and you can look for it under groups.
Thank you, Melissa. And remember, you know more than you know.